to On the Bubble Podcast, episode 101. I'm your host, Sabasa J. Weda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today, we're going to be doing our How to Draft Syndra episode, and we're going to be talking about all the ninja cards in the set and the different archetype that Syndra can be built, and what cards should be in the deck, and what cards we think are overrated and underrated as well. But before we go into our main topic, how's your week? You went to Calling Memphis. How was that?
Yeah, Calling Memphis was a lot of fun. I played Redline Cindra. I was on feature match round 1. I had a pretty solid day 2. I went 5-2, ultimately losing to 2 Zens, who I think ran pretty hot, and that's a thing that can happen. And then my day 2 didn't go so well. I went 1-3. I do think I hit some bad ends of variance, but that is what it is. That being said, there was one other player in the room on the same deck list that I had built, and that was Brody Spurlock, who ended up taking down the event. So congrats to Brody. I know there is some controversy surrounding that. I don't really want to go into it. I think that like a lot of people have said their point. I think that there's a lot of like varying degrees of information about it, and I think that Brody will be saying something about it soon, and if it's going to be discussed, it makes more sense to discuss it when all the perspectives are out there. So I'm not really going to touch this topic too much, but I will just say that there is that kind of floating around, and it's been a topic of a lot of discussion on social media.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think maybe we can even have like a rules episode after all the how to drafts. That'll be probably like a month from now, and at that time maybe we'll have more information as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be good. Anyways, that's pretty much how my week's been. Went to Memphis, came back, had a pretty good weekend overall, even though like it wasn't the most successful tournament weekend. And then since coming back, I've been working on a bunch of content for Redline Syndra. So sideboard guide and how to play guide are now up on Patreon if you're interested in checking out Redline Syndra for RTNs. And I do think it's quite a good RTN deck since it asks your opponent some pretty tough blocking decisions. I think people are still learning to play against the deck, and I think it's kind of hard to play against in general. So I think that Syndra is a pretty solid RTN choice. And if you want to check that out, you can do so on our Patreon, patreon.com/onthebobble. And a deck tech for the Syndra deck should be coming out on YouTube for free soon. I haven't recorded it yet, but I imagine by the time this episode is posted, it will probably be up or up shortly. So yeah, that's sort of what I've been up to. Maybe at this moment, we can also shout out all of our patrons. Thank you so much for all of your support and for all of the enthusiasm around the Syndra deck as well. There's been just like, the deck's been very popular. People have been very excited about it. There's been lots of questions, lots of people joining the Discord, and lots of people excited about getting into Hunted Limited, which we're going to be starting to touch on in this week's episode. There's a lot to unpack in this set, but yeah, I'm excited to talk about it with everybody and kind of learn the format with everybody in the Patreon. So yeah, thanks to all of our patrons, and thank you to all of our listeners as well.
The small thing about the Syndra CC deck, it's a sick deck. I feel like before Calling Memphis, there was like a lot of talk with like maybe like not on social media, but just like in general that like maybe Syndra is one of the worst heroes from the Hunted set, and then you kind of proved everyone wrong and being like, oh, Syndra actually is strong enough to win a Calling. So it's kind of really cool that like from week 0 going into week 1 already, like the power, like it's been flipped of like who's the most powerful hero from Hunted. It's kind of sick.
Yeah, I do think it kind of caught people a little bit off guard. I had kept the deck a little bit quiet just because it seemed like it was in such a different direction from other people's lists. And I think that often I don't think there's that many edges to be gained in Flesh and Blood by hiding things. I think like most things people figure out on Talishar, but I do think that especially with Syndra being such a tricky deck with like Flick Knives and Mask of Momentum and other on hits, that people not having experience on how to block against it is a really real edge. And I kind of think that like for the Calling Memphis weekend, Syndra was probably just like actually top tier, like that's like amongst the best decks. Like maybe I don't know, like maybe like Viscerai and Cindra were the best decks for the weekend, something like that. I think that going into RTNs, I'm really curious to see where she lands. I suspect she will not be like tier 0 BDIF, but I do think that she's like a very solid aggro deck, if that makes sense. Like I think the surprise factor like pushes her like almost to that tier, but then I think even once people know how to play against her, she just has like good math, good numbers, is still tricky to block against even if you know what's coming, and just like doing something fundamentally powerful. I just think she has some weaknesses that you can exploit and target if you really want to. Like frostbites, for example, are really problematic for her. So like Jarl is like a very good duck hunter.
Yeah, and Jarl also gets to play Spinal Crush, right? Like that's a really good card into Syndra.
Interestingly, I think Spinal Crush is a little bit less of a problem just because so many of your cards block 3. You just have like a bunch of Lava Vein loyalties and they all block 3, and you're like kind of happy just blocking 6 and then sending a bunch of head jabs, like, or sending some 4s. Like, I don't know. The deck does block surprisingly well, but it really doesn't want to have to pay resources for things, and it also doesn't like Prism, for example, who just like has constant 7 power go against and gain them 4 life if they hit. That is not an unwinnable matchup, but not a great matchup for you either.
Yeah, well, Prism requires Cyborg Hate for Prism to be able to beat
Yeah.
that deck usually. So you're typically, if you don't play the Cyborg cards, you're hoping you don't play against it, right?
Yeah, that's very true. Unless you're just like a deck that naturally has poppers, but considering you're trying to play fully pitchless, there's not really 6 powers that you're wanting to play.
That makes sense. Ninjas with 0 cost 6 powers would not be fair.
Yeah, you do have like 0 for 7s, but like they don't, well, like effectively 0 for 7s because you cheat them with the chest resource, but they don't have 7 power when they're defending.
Yeah, that's it's really important for that one. Okay, then let's move right into talking about the limited Syndra decks. I guess before we start talking about Syndra, we should start with the pack collation for Hunted. I guess not everyone would know this, but there is a set number of cards for each class and type of card. So there's 14 cards in a pack of Hunted. We're going to start with 2 assassin commons, 2 ninja commons, it could be draconic ninja or ninja, 2 warrior, same thing, warrior or draconic warrior commons, and then there's going to be 1 generic common. There's also going to be 1 warrior assassin split hybrid card, 1 ninja assassin split hybrid card, and 1 draconic common. And in some of the packs, apparently one of these can be replaced by a 7th class common or a second equipment slot. And then there's also a dedicated equipment slot. So this means there can be at least 2 equipments in a set, or sorry, in a pack. And also we have the 2 rare slots where the second rare slot can become a majestic and a foil. It could be any foil in the set that is not a reprint. Reprints cannot come in foil.
Yeah. If this is like a lot to remember, usually what I'm looking for is the 2/2/2 class cards. And then there's kind of like the 4 cards that's like generic, 2 hybrids, draconic, like some combination of those, or potentially a third of one of the classes. So you could have a 2/2/3. And that's like often kind of enough to piece it together. And then the rare plus foil equipment is like that's in every set. So people familiar with Fab Draft should be pretty used to that. So that's sort of like shorthand how I remember it, but you can remember actually all the details if you want to get every little edge.
Honestly, knowing this information does help, right? Like once you're like 3 or 4 picks in and you like notice that there isn't any like ninja cards, like there is a ninja assassin card in the pack, but there's 2 ninja cards missing, then you know that at least somebody on your right is picking a ninja card and someone at least first picked the ninja card as well.
Yeah, I do think that information is very important for reading signals as well as sending signals. I think we both favor reading signals over sending signals, but sending signals is technically non-zero. It's just you never know if the person next to you cares or not.
Yeah, I feel like one of the not a popular, but like maybe not a strong drafting strategy, but definitely a popular one would be just forcing a class. So like they're not gonna read signals no matter what you do. And even like they'll probably like figure out that like, maybe 3 people to my right is all drafting warrior halfway through a pack and they might be forced to pivot at some point like that. But like typically, if it's not like 3 people in a row drafting that class, like they're still gonna force. And in some sets, there were people who forced no matter how many people was drafting the same deck. So you don't even know if even if you send the right signals, quote unquote, they're not gonna care or they're not even gonna read it.
Anyways, enough about the pack collation signals. Let's move along. We can talk about the blocking value of the cards in the set that are available to Syndra. So I'll start with the Draconic cards. There's 10 commons, 5 of them block 3, 2 of them block 2, and there are 3 null blocks. The instance. And then at rare, there is 6 rares with 2 3 blocks, 1 2 block, and 3 null blocks. So Draconic cards block okay. The finishers block really well, is what I'd say. The attack finishers block very, very well. The other cards are usually like 2 blocks. And the instance, Syndra doesn't really tend to want, and they don't really block.
Yeah, I feel like Draconic cards are kind of split into two different categories. They're like either Fang cards or they're Cindra cards. And the ones that Cindra wants typically block for 3, and the one that Fang wants are typically the no blocks because they're instants.
And the 2 blocks are usually really good, like Blaze Headlong, for example.
Blaze Headlong blocks for 3.
Blocks 2.
Oh, Blaze Headlong blocks for 2. Oh, I'm thinking about the rare one, the March of Loyalty, which is the Draconic action that attacks for 4, blocks for 3.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I got those two mixed up. And I guess we'll move on and talk about the Ninja and the Draconic Ninja. They're going to be 24 commons. 10 of them is going to block for 3, 14 blocks for 2. And they also have 12 rares. 10 of them block for 3, and 2 of them block for 2. This means surprisingly, the Ninja cards, at least at rare, block really well in this set.
Yeah, because most of the ninja rares are like draconic payoff finisher type cards, like the Dragon Power, Art of the Dragon type cards. So a lot of them end up blocking 3. And then in the common slot, I think the general theme is the cards that have unconditional go again are 2 blocks. The cards with conditional go again are 3 blocks. I think ninja is just the class that blocks the worst in this set. Like warrior and assassin have a lot of 3 blocks. Ninja has still some 3 blocks, but also quite a few 2 blocks.
Mm-hmm. I think compared to some of the other or older sets, they still have a lot more 3 blocks than what I'm typically used to, right? Or at least it feels that way.
Yeah. I do think that just like in general, the card quality in the set is higher, both in terms of like the block values are just on average a little higher than usual. And I think a lot of the offensive values are also a little bit higher than average. Like we have a lot of 0 for 4s and some like 1 for 5s with go again type things.
Yeah, and what's different from the other sets now is that there are a lot of cards that only exist in red in this set, right? So like all the draconic cards only come in red, and there are no yellows and blues, and not even just the draconic cards. The some of like the ninja draconic cards are, I guess they're all still a draconic, but there's a lot of cards in the set, like let's say Ronin Renegade, that used to come in all 3 colors when it first got printed, but in this set only comes in the red variant. It makes it so that like you don't have like unplayable versions of Ronin Renegade, or at least you don't have yellow Ronin Renegade, right?
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's not in our show notes, but we have the hybrid ninja assassin cards as well. And all of these at rare and common block for 2, the only exception being Lair of the Spider, the D-React, which blocks for 3. So you're not getting a lot of block value out of the hybrids.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot that those. I guess a note on these is that all of these cards have inherit and go again. So that's why they all block for 2.
I guess cut through is like technically conditional, but the condition of having a dagger deal damage is definitely not free, but not too hard to meet either.
Mm-hmm. So true, so true. Okay, and last but not least, there's the generics. So there's gonna be 12 commons, 3 of them block for 3, 6 of them block for 2, and then we have 2 no blocks and 8 rares. 4 of them block for 3, 1 of them block for 2, and there's 3 no blocks. But out of the 3 no blocks, one of them is Calming Breeze that prevents 3 damage, and Sigil of Solace that gains you 3 life. So they're pseudo 3 blocks.
Yeah. Generics actually blocking surprisingly well in this set. Also notably the blue the 3 blocks at generic at common are blue. they're all blue 3 blocks. So there's a couple extra blue 3 blocks that are available through the generic slot. Those are actually like a really big bulk of the blue 3 blocks that Syndra has available to her. She doesn't really have many cards that can actually come as blue 3 blocks. It's pretty much just the generics, grow wings, and then like rares. That's like actually it.
Oh, okay. That's actually quite limited. And I guess the generics are, because they are generics, they're available for all the decks, right? So like everyone can pick them up.
Yeah, and I think that they're actually pretty important cards. Like I think that the blue 3 blocks are just like very good picks in general, and need to kind of be moved up because there's so many reds. So I think a common theme we'll see in this set is that blue 3 blocks are actually like kind of premium, and in Syndra they are especially premium because you don't really have that much access to class cards that block 3, whereas like Assassin, like I think almost all the class cards block 3, and Warrior, almost all the class cards block 3. We'll do the breakdowns on those episodes, but they have way more 3 blocks in their class cards, whereas Ninja is quite limited, especially at common. Rare, there is more.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so typically like ninjas are the class that can't block as well, but they have more inherent go again, so they're better at converting their hands naturally. And then the downside is that their cards sometimes block for less. But if you're just not blocking and sending your hand all the time, honestly, not even the downside.
You just have to make sure that you're able to actually convert. I think a big theme in this set is that because it's so powerful, stumbling is really, really painful. You need to be getting like very close to 3 out of every card as kind of like a baseline. And I feel like anytime you are like maybe like a point below that here and there is okay. So if you're getting like 8 out of 3 cards or like 5 out of 2 cards and happens like once or twice, like maybe it's fine. But I think if you start getting like 2 points below, it's like pretty punishing. It feels like it's very hard to catch up unless your opponent also has a mediocre turn somewhere.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And one other thing that we should talk about is there are more equipment than in this set than usual, is what it feels like. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but at least it feels like it's in the packs more often, and that's thanks to the extra equipment slot that could show up in the packs. And I guess we'll just like quickly go through the equipments that Cindra can play. I guess number one will be the rare Guardwell cycle. This cycle is kind of ridiculous. It's at generic, so everyone gets to play it. But basically, what it does is it blocks for 1 on its own with Guardwell, and this gets +1 while defending a weapon attack. So this is just a 2 block equipment that every hero in the set gets.
And you can either use it to block 1 on an attack and 1 on a weapon, or just block 2 on a weapon. You kind of always get the 2 block. Just don't block a Syndra dagger that's coming in for 1 with it as your first equipment block. That's like pretty much the only way that you can mess it up.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
But yeah, it's like a pretty free. It's the most free 2 block equipment. There's other equipment in the set that you can get 2 block out of, but it's all like you play a mini game for it. Whereas Guardwall just kind of happens, which is really, really sweet.
We also get to play the Vengeance cycle. This is the Draconic Anti-Arachne cycle. So they're basically all just Iron Rots. So they all Blade Break and block for 1. They have an additional ability if it's attacking an Arachne. I'm not going to go too much into detail about their abilities, but if you're playing against Arachne, you get an extra bonus. If not, they're still Iron Rots. So these are still pretty good.
Yeah, they're still pretty good. I think they're my least favorite of all the equipment in the set, but Iron Rot is still pretty good, and I think you really want a full set of equipment. So maybe don't pick these like super super highly, but if you're needing to fill out your equipment, like just pick these up. These are fine, even if you're not playing into Arachne, and then the bonus abilities into Arachne are solid. They're not like I don't think it's like wow, I have these bonus equipment into Arachne, I'm gonna smash Arachne now, but it does give you some nice upside, is how I would put it.
Yeah, it does give you extra option selects.
Yes. Yeah, it usually still converts for 1. You just have a few more options available to you, and more options is always good.
The next cycle to talk about will be the Leapfrog equipments. They're the Assassin Ninja equipment cycle. All of these are also Blade Break 1, so they're still all Iron Rots. But they also have an additional ability that says when an opponent plays or activates an attack reaction, you may add this to the active chain link as a defending card.
And notably, you can use this as like the equipment are back and then they move onto the chain when your opponent attack reacts. But you can also use them where you block with them on an earlier chain link and then on a subsequent chain link they react and then you move them from the previous chain link into the current chain link and they leapfrog from the previous one to the current one, hence the name. That's most relevant against Fang. It can also be relevant against Cindra, who has a danger digits, especially if it's getting kind of like later in the game and you think they may want to use it, blocking on an early chain link with the leapfrog. Like if you block on like the Kunai, they start with the Kunai, you block on the Kunai with the leapfrog. It's like a little awkward for them actually.
That's kind of interesting. Oh, I guess they have to break their combat chain if they want to destroy the leapfrogs. So like how, the game works, you can always close a combat chain in between your go-agains, and this will move the leapfrog equipment if they block with it to the graveyard, which means they can't come back and block again. So if it is free to break the combat chain, you should do so. But Fang and Syndra both do care about the chain link sometimes. So they might not be able to break it if they wanted to play a specific card. So when you get these leapfrogs in those spots, you get an extra block value, and that could sometimes just like win you the game on its own.
And if you're against Fang, the best way to use this, block one leapfrog on the first chain link, and then if they are representing the ability to double react, you block one leapfrog on the first chain link, and then if they need the second chain link thing, they will react. You can leapfrog over. Often they get like +1 bonus. Like there's some cards that literally just get one more power if it's on the second chain link, and by putting one leapfrog on the first chain link, you're kind of getting your one value out of it, whether they close the chain or not. So that's kind of the most effective way to use it. Usually, if you put two leapfrogs on the first chain link, it's like pretty free for them to just close the chain and go up on value. So I kind of like just putting one, especially if you have multiples, just like every time they could have two reacts, you put one leapfrog on and then just go, okay, do you need it? And sometimes they do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we have two other equipments that Syndra can play. The first one being Danger Digits. This is the arm piece that can attack reaction and basically be a one-time use flick knives. And as we know from the CC Syndra deck, flick knives is very powerful in that deck. And in limited, it's a little bit not as abusive as in CC, but one free damage is still one free damage, and cards care about daggers hitting, so this will consider the dagger to be hit, and you can get all of the triggers from what is that card called? Cut Through and Poison Blade to trigger off these danger digits. So you want to be looking out for combos like that to kind of abuse.
Yeah. And I think that this equipment's just like really powerful in Syndra. At its baseline, it's worth the 1 damage, and then typically what it does is like often your gameplay is you swing a dagger, do a bunch of stuff, and then next turn and then you buy back the other dagger, and then you swing a dagger, do a bunch of stuff, buy back the dagger that's in the graveyard, and you keep doing that. What Danger Digits lets you do is flick the dagger that you swung with at the start of the turn, and then end on 2 daggers. So it kind of like lets you go like up a dagger, which usually means that you can go like up 1 Kodachi swing somewhere in the end game, and sometimes that's just like worth a card. So Danger Digits is actually like really, really powerful, I think, because you get the 1 damage and the extra dagger swing somewhere is usually how it works out.
A question that I have about Danger Digits: do you think this is more powerful than a guard bow equipment in the arm slot?
It's very close. It's close enough that I think if I had Danger Digits, I wouldn't pick Guardwell, and if I had Guardwell, I wouldn't pick Danger Digits. I think in Arachne, Danger Digits is probably more powerful than Guardwell.
Okay.
But I think in Syndra, it's like roughly the same. It's usually worth 2 points, so I think it's roughly the same.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess we'll move on to the last piece of equipment in this that Syndra can play. Coat of Light. It'll be Coat of Alliance?
Allegiance.
Allegiance? So Coat of Allegiance. So this card is a draconic chess piece, and has action, destroy this, and it gains a resource. And then until end of turn, you may only play cards that are draconic. This is just basically a Blossom of Springs, but limits you to only play Draconics cards for the turn.
Yeah, and notably, it doesn't have to be the first thing that you do on the turn, so you can potentially play like, I don't know, like a pick up the point that has a head jab that has go again, and then close the chain, and then crack this, and then play out your draconic cards. So there are cool lines to do with that. You can also just block down, break it, play a 1 for 5, like a draconic 1 for 5, and just have like a 1 card 5, which is really strong. So I think Code of Allegiance is pretty good. I think it's very, very good in what we'll be talking about. Archetypes is very, very good in one of the archetypes, the more red line one, and still good but less good in the blue Syndra archetype that wants to pitch, that I think people are probably more familiar with. It's good in both, but better in the red line one.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I think we've seen these like chess piece equipment that generate one resource, and every single time it's we see it in draft, it is one of like the more powerful cards in the set. And I feel like Code of Allegiance doesn't disappoint, even though it has the extra line of like, limitations. It really doesn't feel like that big of a limitation.
Yeah, agreed.
Do you want to talk about what kind of archetypes there are for Cindra and what we can look to draft, at least the powerful ones?
Yeah, so I think the main two archetypes of Syndra are Syndra that plays lots, like a bunch of 1 costs. I'm going to call this blue Syndra because you need to pitch blues to play your 1 costs, and this is probably the deck that people have played in sealed. And then I think there's also like a more Cheerios or Head Jab or Red Line Syndra. I'm going to call this Red Syndra for the episode. And this one plays, you can still play some blues, you can still play some 1 cost, but you're mostly looking to play a bunch of 3 for 0 go agains. And that's primarily what you're doing. And I think that this is more of a draft archetype than a sealed archetype, because you just like have more cards that you see, and you can kind of tailor the cards in your deck a little bit more. And there's certain cards that are like not necessarily high picks that you can get late if you're in this archetype. So we'll talk kind of about like cards that both of them want, and then cards that each of them want, and what some of the differences are. But I do think that these are kind of like the two styles of Syndra you can build. You can maybe blend them a little bit, but I think you kind of want to be either the mostly red line Syndra or the blue line Syndra with 1 cost. I don't think you want to blend these too much.
Do you want to just move right in and talk about the key cards that are good in both decks first?
Let's start with some of the power cards, which I think are your Dragon Power and Art of Dragonfire, especially at red. Yellow Dragon Power is like the 1 for 6. If it's Draconic, is like also pretty good. Art of Dragonfire is the 1 for 5 that deals 2 damage if they're Draconic. So these are effectively 1 for 7s. I think these cards are like pretty important in Syndra, and I think you kind of like, you don't need one of these to have a good Syndra deck, but I think you kind of want one if you can. Maybe on this list as well is Wrath of Retribution, the Syndra legendary. If you can attack 3 times, play this for free, then dagger, or even if you don't play it for free, even if you have to pitch for it, and then your daggers are free and get +2. There's a lot of powerful lines with Wrath of Retribution, so that's like another power card in this vein. And then the last power card in this vein is Dual Threat. We talked about this card in the sealed episode. It's if you swung a weapon, your next attack action gets +3. If you played an attack action, your next weapon gets +3. So ideally you go weapon, attack, play dual threat, close the chain, weapon, attack. The order doesn't matter. It could be attack, weapon, but you want to swing the weapon and attack, and then close the chain and swing the weapon and attack, regardless of whatever order that's in.
So basically, what these are, both of the Dragon Power and the Art of the Dragon Fire, they're basically just 1 cost for 7 chain enders, right? That's kind of ridiculous rate, even in constructed. A 1 for 7 dual threat being a 0 for 6 go again. That's basically what the card reads if you can do both sides of it, and that's when that card is powerful, is when you can do both sides of it, right?
Yeah, it's like fine as a 0 for 3 with go again, but you really do want the both sides of it. And if you have it in your deck, you should be playing towards getting both sides of it. And you can play a Syndra deck without these. You just need really good card quality if that's the case. I feel like having 1 or 2 of these is usually what helps put your deck like above or pull ahead. It feels like you're kind of like playing reasonable games. The games are kind of close, and you need that one Dragon Power or Art of Dragonfire turn to like turn the tide and have things just in your favor. A lot of games in this format come down to 1 or 2 points, and that extra 1 or 2 points on these finishers is a great way to get it. It's not the only way to get it, but your deck is a lot better if you have these finishers. I think if you early pick 1 or 2 of these, especially 2 of these, you can get away with a just okay surrounding, like all the surrounding pieces are just okay, and have a pretty solid deck. I think it's actually that powerful.
Yeah, The games where a Syndra player plays two dragon powers do not feel close.
Mm-hmm.
If they go like head jab, dragon power, and then go head jab, dragon power, you're just like, I feel like I can't come back from this game anymore.
Yeah, and I think that they're just like a game plan in and of themselves. Is like my game plan is to like play reasonable math, keep the game close, and then play like two dragon power turns, and that's gonna like break things in my favor majority of the time.
For the people who don't know what Dragon Power does, it's when this attacks, if it's Draconic, it gains +3. And the easiest way to turn this into a Draconic card in this set will be to crack a fealty token. So you'll need to mark them and hit them with the Syndra ability to make the fealty, and then crack a fealty on the Dragon Power, and then it'll give it +3. And it's a base 4 power attack. So it really isn't hard to make a fealty in this set, and Dragon Power feels pretty free, at least from what I've played so far.
Yeah, I agree. I think you want to like make sure you have some reasonable ways to mark or get fealty, but there's enough ways in the set that if you prioritize them, you should be able to get a couple, and that's kind of all you need. Other power cards that are probably like a step down from the Dragon Powers and Art of Dragonfire and Dual Threat tier is your 0 for 4 go agains. So Blaze Headlong is the most premium one. This is Draconic. If you played a red, it gets go again. Cut Deep, if you've dealt damage with a dagger, it gets +1 and go again, so it becomes a 4 for 0 with go again, and that's pretty good with the kunais. And then Fire Tenant Strike First is a 3 for 0 that gives your next draconic attack on this chain +1. So again, effectively a 0 for 4, and it lets you push on hits with cards like Burning Blade Dance that has the on hit flick a dagger if you control 2 or more chain links. So pushing those on hits is also meaningful. And I think that if you have a lot of these 0 for 4s and kind of like above rate cards, you can make up for having the Dragon Power or Art of Dragonfire. But of course, these are cards that all the Syndra players want, so they're generally contested. And you're probably going to have a few of them, but you probably won't have like a ton of them. You might have like 2 to 3 kind of a thing.
You know what card? The Fire Tenant Strike First. This card's ridiculous because it says your next draconic attack, and it doesn't specify card, so it can buff your kunais, which I found to be kind of disgusting.
Yeah. I think this card is really, really good. I'm a big fan of this card. Honestly, this card at every pitch is good. The yellow is like still just a head jab that creates a breakpoint. Like I think like 2 into 4 is better than 3 into 3, so this is just like kind of better than like pick up the point. And like the yellow pitch is pretty relevant. And then the blue is still like effectively a 0 for 2 go again, which is like you probably prefer a blue 3 block, but if you're gonna play a blue 2 block, this is one of the better ones.
Oh yeah. It's definitely one of the better ones. Mostly if you can go like play this for attacking for 1 and then attack for 4 with the one of the 0 for 3 go against with an on hit. That's still a gross turn. It's really hard to block and you're going to leak some damage. The faster you can get your opponent down lower with Syndra, the more powerful your kunais get, and it just works really nicely.
They can create some really good small hands where your opponent doesn't really get to convert blocking as well as they want to. Like if your opponent wants to block 2 cards and you go like 2 into 4, if they still block 2 cards, you've basically done a 2 card 7 because you get a whole card for the 2, and then you get a 3 block on the 4, and they still leak a damage. So you've basically done a 2 card 7, which is really, really impressive and comes up a lot in the end games, but also comes up in the way that you were talking about, where you chip them low and make your kunais more powerful. So yeah, I like this card in all pitches.
Anything else that the Syndra decks want?
Yeah, so outside of the power cards, you want some fealty makers. I think the heuristic for Syndra is that you don't want fealty makers that are below rate. So like Pledge of Fealty, that is an instant that makes a fealty, is like really unplayable in Syndra. You really want them to like be doing their thing and then give you a fealty. Display Loyalty is probably the best. This is a rare head jab, and if you control a Draconic Chain Link, it gets go again and makes a fealty. This one is just super, super good. And then the D reacts are really good. So Smoke Out, if it blocks a red, you mark them, and Spider's Lair, if it blocks an attack with go again, which is every hero in the set basically, you mark them. So both of these are fantastic. And I think the D reacts in the set are just like extremely good and amongst the best cards in the set. I think Syndra really, really, really wants these because you don't have that many on hits. And even if you do have the 1 for 4s, that there's a couple of 1 for 4s that mark, your opponent's so incentivized just to block those out and use their equipment on that because you don't really have enough on hits to properly tax their equipment that like if you have like 2 mark with magma or something, like it's not that reliable a way to mark them. Whereas the smoke out and spider's lair and display loyalty are, your opponent doesn't really get to interact with these because once they're marked, you're going to get the fealty. Like it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, there's no way to unmark yourself. So once you're marked, you're gonna stay marked until you get hit. The more ways you can mark your opponent, the more ways that more fealties you can make. We said that you want as many like dragon powers and the art of the dragons, and you're not gonna be able to get like 5 of these. So most likely you're gonna have like 2, at most 3. And if you have like one smoke out, one spider's lair, that's like two fealties already. That's enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I kind of actively want 2 of these D-Reacts. Spider's Lair is probably a little bit better than Smokeout, but honestly, they're both so good, and I don't think you can really afford to be choosy. But yeah, basically, I want 2 of these.
Anything else we're looking for Syndra?
So the Draconic finishers are all really good. Hunt the Hunter and For the Emperor is the 1 for 5s. Hunt the Hunter, super premium. Again, like if you played a red, it marks them. So kind of like unconditional mark, really good. And it's on rate, 1 for 5, exactly what Syndra wants. And then for the Drakai is also really good. The 0 for 4 Draconic card that if they have a fealty, if they're marked, you create a fealty. That last clause doesn't matter that much in Syndra. It's more relevant in Fang, but a 0 for 4 Draconic attack action is still just really good.
Feel like chain enders are almost always good in ninjas. Typically, like you just need a couple of these. You don't need to fill your deck with them. You just need make sure that you're not overfilling your deck with these chain enders, or you can have turns where you draw too many of these, and that could kind of ruin your turn. You do need to have ways to have go again first and then end on these cards. A difference between a deck that like doesn't end on a chain ender and ends on like a head jab instead, it's kind of night and day, right? Because you're missing out on 1, maybe even 2 points of damage.
Yeah, and we've kind of talked a lot about how you can't really afford to miss that 1 or 2 points of value in this format, and this is like another way in which you can make sure that you're getting all of that value. In addition to the Draconic finishers, you just want Draconic ninja attacks with Go Again. I like the 0 cost ones a lot. Some of the 1 cost ones are also good in Blue Syndra. You really want a lot of Draconic attacks because you don't want to be paying to retrieve your daggers as much as possible. If you do it like once or twice in the game, you pay a resource, no problem. If you're paying 1 to 2 resources every turn, you're basically swinging an assassin dagger that has no text because like you're paying 2 resources for 1, and that just like isn't really good enough in this set. I think it's like one of the biggest ways you can have a bad Syndra deck. So you really just need like a bulk of Draconic attacks, ideally a mix of ones with Go Again and Chain Enders, and that's just like sort of required regardless of the Syndra deck you are.
I guess next we will move on and talk about each of the decks, like what we're looking for in the blue Syndra deck and what we're looking for in the red Syndra deck. Let's start with talking about the blue Syndra deck first.
Yeah, so the defining thing about blue Syndra is that you are playing some 1 cost, so you can make use of a blue. I think that the 1 cost you're looking for are Mark with Magma. That's the 1 for 4. If you control 2 or more Draconic Chain Links, it gets Go Again and it has on-hit Mark. This is really nice, and notably it blocks 3. I think it blocking 3 is really important. And then in addition to that, you can play 1 for 5 Chain Enders. I think you usually want about 5-ish Chain Enders. You can play even a little bit more if a lot of them block for 3. But the idea is that you are doing turns like Kunai for 1, Mark with Magma for 4, 1 for 5 Chain Ender, then you've done a 3-card 10 with some like annoying breakpoints and chip damage, and that's sort of like what you're aiming for. I think in general, the 3-block 1 costs are the best because one of the weaknesses of Blue Syndra is that you can, when you don't have a blue and you have the 1 cost, it's like a little bit punishing. So having 3 blocks just means that you can always convert them for 3 rather than getting priced into playing them out. Like if you have a handful of like 2-block leg taps, your hand's like always worth 8, kind of no matter what you do, which is really unfortunate. Whereas if you have 3 blocks, you can just choose to fold the hand.
I see. I guess this is a little bit different from the classic like Katsu deck with like Kodachis, right? Where a lot of the Kodachi decks used to just like pitch a blue went Kodachi 5 a lot. You can't do that here because of the Syndra's weapon getting destroyed every time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because of the dagger breaking, you kind of need to typically send one dagger as your starter, and then you can play some leg taps and chain enders from there. And I think the reason the draconic ones are the best is pretty apparent here, because if you go dagger, draconic leg tap, 5, then you can buy back your other dagger, then you can do the same play pattern next turn. Whereas if you're missing a draconic card, you actually be short of resource, and you will need to like pitch another card, or I don't know. It gets awkward very quickly, and going off of daggers is a little risky because then you just like might not have a starter. If you are going to play 2 blocks, I like Dust Runner Outlaw since it's also draconic and it can be a starter, so you can play it in place of the dagger. And then Grow Claws is also quite good. I think this is a little bit overrated actually. It being not draconic means that like it doesn't fit in quite as nicely, but I think that the 1 for 5 rate is like enough compensation that it's still a good card. But I'm not really a fan of like throw yourself at them or the 1 for 4 on hit mark that blocks 2 and is not draconic. I think those cards are just a little bit too low floor and not high enough ceiling.
Then what about the red Syndra deck? What's different about the red Syndra deck versus the blue Syndra deck?
Yeah, the Red Cinder deck is playing basically just as many head jobs as it possibly can. And the idea is that all your cards are worth 3 if you just keep playing head jobs. This archetype really likes draconic head jobs. So like I think that these cards are just good in general, and the head jobs are good in general. But like Ronin Renegade and even Hunt to the Ends of Wraith, which is a 0 for 2, 0 for 4 if they're marked, and if if it attacks an Arachnia marks them. I think you can play this card even just as like a 0 for 2 draconic starter, and it's like still pretty good. And like sometimes you'll get the 4 anyways versus Cindra and Faiy, and I think that's like really good in this archetype. And the idea is just like basically playing a whole bunch of head jobs, and you have Code of Allegiance to play a 1 cost somewhere, so you can play a 1 cost without pitching for it. And that extra resource is like really critical for helping you kind of go above rate. And this deck can play some blues. So you can play some blues and some like ideally 3 block 1 cost. So when you don't have the blues, it's fine. And then like maybe like Arsenal a 1 cost, wait till you draw the blue to go with it, and then you'll have a hand that works out. But you're mostly playing out head jobs is the idea behind this deck.
Is there a problem that you can like combine both of these decks together and like play something like a bunch of head jabs and a bunch of these like 1 costs? Like, is there an issue in doing that?
I think that like the blue Syndra decks do want some head jobs regardless. But as you start to run more leg tops and more costed cards, you just kind of need to have a higher blue count. Whereas the red Syndra deck like just like doesn't need a high blue count, and you're pretty happy with some like otherwise kind of mopey head jobs. So I think that the cards that they end up wanting is a little bit different. Like a lot of the base cards and the high picks are similar. So like you still want the power cards, you still want your 0 for 4s, you still want like Ronin Renegade and the Draconic head jobs. Like I think all the decks want those. So you can kind of like draft and then see what's open. But yeah, if you end up with a bunch of 1 costs, I think you need a high blue count. And if you're playing a bunch of head jobs, you don't want a very high blue count because you don't really have ways to spend those resources is kind of the problem.
I see. So you don't really want to be in the middle then if you're going to be drafting Syndra.
Yeah, you can potentially trim a little bit on blue count if you have like a medium number of 1 costs and then like quite a few head jobs, but I think that you'll be a little bit less consistent. So I think you either want to be higher blue count, lots of 1 costs, very consistent, or lower blue count and not many 1 costs. Because the problem is like if you start having hands where you go like dagger, head job, leg tap, and you like, or even dagger, head jab, finisher, that's like 9 damage, and that's okay. But when you're not able to spend all the resources, is a little bit awkward. So I think you either want enough 1 cost that you can kind of somewhat reliably spend all those resources, or mostly head jobs so that you don't need to spend the resources on most of your turns.
To both increase your consistency and to increase your rate, you just want to be like more red line or more blue pitch.
Yes, I think so. For the head job deck, there's like a bunch of cards I'm going to mention here as like maybe not high picks, but cards you can get late that like kind of incentivize you to play this archetype and have an important role to play. The first one is Blessing of Vincerikai. This is the Draconic Action Aura. It's a 0 cost 2 block, and you play it. It takes your action point. It doesn't have go again, and then at the start of your turn, it breaks, and your first attack gets +3 and is Draconic. this helps you create big turns because like if you just go 3-3-3-3, you're not really pushing damage over, whereas Blessing of Inzerakai lets you push damage over. It helps you going first, and it makes the first attack draconic, which is really, really good for a few reasons. One is that it makes your head, like your non-draconic head jabs, into draconic head jabs and guarantees you have the starter to play out your like Lava Vein loyalty type cards that need 2 chain links. So that's really good. And then it's also really good with Art of the Dragonfire or Dragon Power. I had this in my draft last night actually, where I played Blessing of Inzerakai, blocked with 3 cards, and then did Code of Allegiance, Art of Dragonfire for 2 and 8 off of like 1 card essentially. Kind of like 2 cards because I spent 1 last turn, but it was very, very powerful every time I did that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty strong. And that means you don't require a fealty to turn on one of these cards, right? So it kind of replaces that fealty slot.
Yeah, and you will have some fealty, and that's like part of the equation here for sure. But Blessing of Inzerakai like helps you fix all of that as well. So I think Blessing's really good, especially in the red line deck. I think this card's maybe a little underrated in Syndra in general, but yeah, the red line deck is where it is best, and it really does help break the symmetry of going first and second. If you draw this and you play it going first, it really evens up the game. So I've liked that about the card.
Does that replace something like for the Drakai, like one of those like
Yeah, it's basically a chain under, yeah, because it doesn't have go again.
yeah, that makes sense.
And then you can basically just get like a whole bunch of head jabs that like other decks don't want. We talked about yellow fire tenant strike first. I think that's really good here, especially because it's like also kind of a resource card to play your 1 cost, but you don't necessarily always need the whole blue. So you can do like dagger, play your head jabs, play play one of the chain enders, and that's like a pretty good turn. It creates breakpoints, which helps you leak damage, which is important in this deck. So doing like the 2 into 4 is quite a bit stronger than 3-3. And then there's a bunch of head jobs that you can get that other people don't want, like pick up the point, tag the target, and grow wings are like not very high priority picks for Syndra, but you can get them kind of late in this deck. And then Outed is also not an exciting card, but a pretty playable card in this deck. That's the 0 for 3 null block. You can't play it if you're marked, and if it attacks a marked hero, it gets +1. So if they're marked, it's a 0 for 4. And sometimes you can like combo this with, you mark them with a D-react and you start with Outed and it's a 0 for 4. And it's like actually pretty okay.
Yeah, this is the generic, right?
Yeah, the generic. Yeah. And like, so all of these are like not cards that you're like picking early and then being like, I'm going to be the head jab Syndra. You're picking the good Syndra cards. And then late in the pack, if you're like not seeing blues, you're not really getting many leg taps, you can go into this archetype.
This was showcased in the draft at where was it?
Prague.
Prague. Yeah, it was in the top 8 draft of Prague, right?
I don't think it was a top 8 draft. I think it was the win and in for top 8. You didn't see the draft process, but you saw the gameplay.
I see. So it was like the last round going into top 8.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, so if you want to see the deck play, you can. I think it has a tendency to like not look like a very good deck, and then you play it and you're like, somehow this is just like actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's like one of those things of like just being able to convert your hand every turn is like worth something, and this is like forcing your opponent to just like do something better than just converting the hand every turn. Some decks just can't do that. Mostly when somebody like when everyone else stumbles in the draft during the drafting process, and you just have head jab, head jab, head jab, and convert every hand, you can get people for sure.
Yeah, I also think that like Blessing of Inzerakai really plays into this, where like sometimes you can block down, play a Blessing of Inzerakai. They don't really like if they can't convert their hand that efficiently on offense. Like let's say they have like a 4-card 10, and then you're able to go like all your cards are worth 3 and you have the 3 from the Blessing of Inzerakai, so you do like 15, or maybe you have a 4 in there, so you do like 16. You just end up pulling ahead in that way. So yeah, you are kind of like preying on them not being able to convert, whereas you are very consistent at converting, and you do get to do the you can still do the Dragon Power, Art of Dragonfire, like above rate power plays that the regular blue Syndra can do in this deck as well, mostly off of Code of Allegiance. So you kind of get that as well as a way to pull ahead. And yeah, even though you can get fatigued, you can, because you probably still have some blues and yellows in your deck, you can still dagger loop them at the end of the game. So as long as you get them low enough, you can still win fatigue by dagger looping.
Then let's move on and talk about some of the overrated cards that we think and the underrated cards. I guess let's start with the overrated cards.
The big ones for me are the 1-cost 2-block reds. I kind of mentioned this before, but like throw yourself at them. Not a great card. If you're going to play the 1-cost 2-block reds, I like Dust Runner, Outlaw, and Grow Claws the best. Kind of think these cards are still a little overrated, even though they're decent.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I also think like Poison Blade is kind of overrated right now.
Hmm.
I think that card's it is good. It has some synergy with some like cards, but I feel like people might be picking them a little bit too highly. And then been seeing people do plays like pitch a blue, poison blade, dagger, dagger, and then both the dagger just get blocked out by equipment, and they just went, a 2 card 5 essentially, and it's a very easy block. The poison blade red gets blocked by a 3 block, then 2 equipment pieces is not hard to do, and all the good decks in this format is supposed to or should have 4 pieces of equipment. So it's not like I feel like you don't have enough on hits. I think you said this earlier, but you don't have enough on hits to like rip people's equipment early, and like this is like a really good spot for their opponent to use their equipment. So like for this to be really effective, you need to like do poison blade, dagger, dagger like more than 3 times, and that's just not realistic. You're gonna be too underrate too many times if you do this, right?
I agree with everything you said, and I think the other problem with this card is that it incentivizes you to swing with both your daggers. So like you need both your daggers to begin with, and it also doesn't give you a way to like recover your daggers afterwards. So I think it's like a lot of investment. It like plays that require you to double dagger are actually like pretty expensive to set up in this format, and I don't think the payoff is really there. That being said, I kind of like the blue for both throw yourself at them and poison blades. They're reasonable ways to close out the game, and typically by the time you get to second cycle, your opponent's going to have gone through a lot of their equipment already, so the impact of this actually goes up. And I actually like these cards at blue. I'd rather have a blue 3 block, but like as far as blue 2 blocks goes, these aren't bad. Having a throw yourself at them is like pretty good.
Yeah, well, not every blue in your deck have to be a 3 block, right? Because like you have to be pitching some of them, and you're not gonna be blocking with all of them. So as a blue to be played late in the game, Poison Blade is a pretty good like one or two of in your deck.
Yeah.
Then what about some underrated cards? I think I'll start with I think the biggest underrated card in the set, at least for Syndra, might be Dragon Power Yellow and Blue. We're talking how Dragon Power is a good card, and I think it still is a good card at yellow, right? Because like yellow Dragon Power is like still a 1 for 6 that can be played late game.
Yeah, it's a 1 for 6. You can pitch it, and it's a 3 block. I think it just does a lot for you. I think like the red is better, but I think the yellow is still good. And then the blue is just like maybe less of a win con, but a very premium blue.
Yeah, and I think it ties really nicely to your next point here. You wrote blue 3 blocks. Dragon Power is a blue 3 block.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on that when we were talking about the block value of cards, and that Cindra doesn't have that much access to blue 3 blocks, actually. So I think that you need to pick blue 3 blocks a little bit higher in Cindra. Like the generics might be higher picks than you expect them to be. I think people are so used to picking reds really highly, and there are some reds that are worth picking really highly, like your super premium 0 for 4s, your Art of Dragonfires. Those are the best picks in the set. But I think that the blue block 3s are like a lot higher than they would be in other sets because they're so sparse, especially in Syndra. And I think that the difference between a deck that has these blue 3 blocks and doesn't is pretty big. Because like in the blue Syndra, you can't really afford to miss on blues. So I think you want like 10-ish blues. But if they all block 2 and you draw a bunch of blues, you have a big problem. And if you don't draw blues, you have a big problem. So you like kind of need like as many blue 3 blocks as possible, ideally like 5 or so. And then in the red line deck, you don't need as many total blues, but you really want the blues to block 3 as well because not all of your hands actually have costed cards. In fact, many of your hands do not. So you want the ability to just be able to still convert that card for 3 by blocking with it. So having those blue 3 blocks is like really, really important. And I think that you need to actively look for spots to pick these up. Like I think, your Syndra fourth picking a generic blue block 3, totally reasonable.
Honestly, I can see myself picking something like Put in Context, which is like a generic defense reaction that blocks for 3, cost 0. I can see myself picking this card even higher than that, like even pick 2, pick 3.
Yeah, I think put in context can go up even a little bit, but I think even like just like trot along and nip at the heels can easily be like a pretty high pick for Syndra.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I feel like decks with I feel like all the decks in the format want these cards. So as the format develops and more people realize this, these cards are going to become higher and higher picks.
I think that's true, and I think that blue 3 blocks are worth more in this format in general. I think the generics are like disproportionately more valuable in Syndra though, because so much of our card pool blocks for 2, whereas almost all the assassin cards and almost all the warrior cards block for 3 at blue. So they actually just have like more in-class blue 3 blocks, whereas Syndra like actually only has grow claws. So you need or grow wings. So you just need to pick these up at generic, or you're not going to have very many. Or I guess there's like rares, like there's like Silver Talon and and Dragon Power, but like those are rares, so you can't really count on them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Other underrated cards, defense reactions. I think defense reactions are underrated in general. I think some people think that Cindra is the aggressive deck, so she doesn't need defense reactions. No, defense reactions are still just really, really good. I think that ultimately, like the mark which becomes a fealty. The fealty is typically easily worth like 1 to 2 value. Like if you get to play a head jab instead of pitching to a dagger, for example, that can be like a +2. If you have an Art of Dragon Fire, that's a +2. So it's like not that hard to get +2 out of this. So, and even if you're getting like a +1 out of this, it's still like essentially a 0 for 4. And that's not even to mention how powerful they are in the end game against Fang and Arachne when they have reactions. If you don't have defense reactions, you just like don't have good blocking decisions. But if you have defense reactions, you can navigate your way through some pretty tough end games, and it's just completely different if you have them or not.
Then what about the non-marking defense reaction? I'm talking mostly about Lalo, which is a generic defense reaction at yellow that blocks for 3. It says if you are marked, you can't play this.
I think this card's probably also underrated. I was playing this in my draft yesterday into Fang and Syndra, and I think it is pretty okay. You can even sometimes get the 0 for 4 out of it if they're marked, but even as just like a yellow 3 block, it's okay. Probably don't want to have to play it into Arachne, because Arachne is the hero that is wanting to mark you as much as possible and wanting to end their turns with you marked, meaning you start the next turn marked the most often. So yeah, careful with this into Arachne.
Okay, so but you still play this in Syndra.
I think it's playable, yeah.
But just slightly less good than the Lair of the Spider and the Draconic Smokeout.
I think it's a lot less good than Layer the Spider or Smokeout or put in context, but I think it's still playable.
And then the last card on this list, you have Blessing of Vincerakai. We talked about this card a lot, and yeah, I think I agree with you. This card is definitely underrated. I got like a 10th pick Blessing of Vincerakai once, and I was just like, this card's not that bad.
Yeah, I still don't think it's like a super high pick, but it's a card that you can get late that is like really, really sweet, and it feels like this is like the Redline Syndra card to me, at least, where like Fang doesn't really want this card. It's okay in the blue Syndra, but they can play like 1 for 5 finishers, and you're just like, I want 0 cost finishers, and like, yeah, like for the Drakai is great, but like all the other decks want for the Drakai, and like I'm not gonna get that many, so I just get these blessing of Vincerakai that like other people don't want, and they're just super good in my deck, and they synergize really well with the non-draconic head jabs that you have, because suddenly you just have a starter, and you're just like super happy. So yeah, card's sweet.
This card feels unfair when it's good. So any card like this, it's what is that card? Strong Yield from Rosetta. It feels a little bit like that, but a little bit more impactful than Strong Yield is what it feels like this time.
I think it making something draconic is like really, really big. The downside of it is that you don't have as like clean of a 2 card play typically. Like you don't get to do the strong yield Rotwood Reaper type play, but you can potentially just like block down and play this, or like play some head jabs then play this. So because you have so much go again, it's like pretty easy to play up.
A line I kind of like is like blocking with 2 cards, playing the Vincerakai, and then arsenaling a head jab, so that you can make your next turn even bigger, and then forcing your opponent to try and convert. And if you're playing against someone like Arachne, like sometimes they just cannot convert. They have the typical assassin problem of being like they have to swing their dagger twice. That is just below rate. Like swinging dagger is almost always below rate. So forcing Arachne to swing both their daggers is a good sign.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I've also had spots where Like maybe the game's kind of close, but we're at like I don't know, like 9, 10 life is usually the range where this comes up. Like we're both at like 9 or 10. Maybe I have like a card in Arsenal. I have Blessing of Vincerikai and a head jab, and I can do something like head jab. They block a card because they want to convert. Then you just play Blessing and pass. And like if you have 10 life and some equipment, like they might not be able to take any cards from you, or they take like one card from you, and then you just get this giant crackback with Blessing of Inzerikai. You get to essentially play like potentially a 6 card hand into them because Blessing is just like a +3, so it's kind of like going up a card. If you're able to just like if all your cards are worth 3, that's 15 damage. And then Blessing's worth 18. And if they're at 10, like the game's just over. So you just kind of like get to like put them in the spot where you're like, hey, can you kill me? And if you can't, you're dead. And if you can, I probably have Lava Vein loyalties and they still just block for 3. So I'm not even actually losing value. I can just like block with some of these cards and it's still fine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's really nice that these conditional, the Draconic Ninja cards blocking for 3 just to like bail you out if you draw like somewhat of a bricky hand.
I've found this deck to be a little bit less contingent on first second. I think like a big observation people have had is that Syndra is much better at going second than first, and I think that's really true for the blue line deck. I think it's still true for the red line deck, but I think between like the turn 0 blessing just like completely flips that, and then even outside of that, I've found that like I think that having lots of 3 blocks is one of the ways that you can catch back up from going second is if you can just like block well and kind of drag out the game and like hope that your opponent stumbles somewhere, it's really powerful. And I think that Redline Syndra has a lot of ways to kind of like make that happen, either by like playing Blessing and putting value to next turn, or just like having very modular hands. You have like a lot of play, and I don't feel it's not like easy going first. I think you're is a bit of an uphill battle, but it doesn't feel like the same degree. It doesn't feel like it's to the same degree as the blue deck.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Then do you want to talk about the deck outline next? So this is gonna be like what kind of cards you are looking for in each deck.
So in the blue Cinder deck, I think you want like 9 to 10 blues. At least half of your attacks are draconic, so that means 10 plus. And then you want some chain unders, usually I'd say like about 5-ish. You can go up a tiny bit from that, especially if they all block 3. Ideally, some of these are your Dragon Power or Art of Dragon Fires, but you can make do without it. And then you want 2 to 3 D-Reacts. I think most decks want 2 to 3 D-Reacts in this format.
Yeah, I feel like I've been picking them kind of low, and I've been getting punished for not having defense reactions, and trying to play against Fang without defense reaction is miserable. So yeah, I would recommend trying to get the 3 defense reactions would probably be a good idea.
I think if I had my choice, like 2 red and 1 put in context would be like my ideal setup. For Redline Syndra, you can play somewhere in the realm of 3 to 5 blues. Your yellows can kind of supplement this. You really want your blues to block 3, though. We kind of talked about that. Again, you probably want about half your attacks to be draconic if possible. So that means probably like 12 plus in this case. Ideally, some starters in there, like the Ronin Renegades, are just super, super good in this archetype. You still want some 1 costs, but I think it might be more in the like 2 to 4 range, and you really want them to block 3, and you really want them to be ideally draconic because then you can use them with Code of Allegiance. I think I actively want 2 Blessing of Inserikais in my deck. I think 2 is about the right number. And you want just like a bunch of head jabs, as many head jabs as you can get.
Do you count like Burning Blade Dance, like the conditional head jabs as well, right? Like that's what you're counting, right?
Yeah. I'm counting 0 costs. You can even play Bloodline. If you have enough draconic head jabs and enough consistency, you can even play Bloodline, which is the 2 cost 3 go again, and it costs 1 less for each draconic chain link you control. It's like definitely not a high pick, but it does block for 3, and it does help you extend on these bigger turns. And yeah, it's just kind of okay. I would count that as a head jab, but like maybe not the one you're hoping to have. It's much worse than Burning Blade Dance or Hot on Their Heels.
It's like head jab number 14 or 15 kind of thing, right? Filling out your deck head jabs.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, like, yesterday I played a deck that had 3 of these, and it wasn't great, but I 2-1'd and got to finals and felt like I had a playable game in finals. So like, I don't know. It's kind of just fine.
I think it blocking for 3 is a pretty big deal, right? For that.
Yeah, it blocking for 3 is really, really big. And yeah, sometimes it's just a head job. Or sometimes you pay 1 for it. And it's like, if you're also playing a finisher on that turn, if you go like dagger, pay 1 for this finisher, it's like on like one of the few hands where you have a blue, it's like, yeah, this is just fine.
Acceptable.
Yeah, it's acceptable. Like, it's not aspirational, it's not exciting, but it's okay.
You gotta do what you gotta do sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
Then you wanna talk about you have the next section here that says play style. I'm assuming these are like things you wanna be doing for in Syndra in general.
Yeah.
You wanna start with I guess this would be the most important to know or what how to do in Syndra, and you have Kunai loop right here. So what is a Kunai loop?
So basically, once you get to the end game, this is probably 4 cards in deck, but it could be more. Let's say that you have 0 daggers and you're on your opponent's turn. The loop is you can pitch a blue on your opponent's turn, activate Cindra, get back 2 daggers. So you have 3 cards left. Your turn, you go dagger, dagger, close chain, that costs 2. You Syndra, which costs 3. Then you go dagger, dagger, which costs 2 more. So you need 7 resources on your turn, 3 on your opponent's turn, and you can swing the dagger 4 times. So if you ever get your opponent to 1, this just means that you strip their entire hand with 0 cards out of deck. And if these are like, let's say your last 4 cards, or you only have blues left in the deck, or even if you have like, if you're drawing like blue, 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 red, like 3 blues and a red, or 2 blues, 2 yellows, all of those configurations will also work. So this is sort of just like a hypothetical endgame, and most games do not come down to this, but it's useful. When it does, it's very useful, and it's good to know that it's available to you. So if you're able to get them to 1 and keep your whole hand, you're in the kunai loop, that you just basically win the game.
This means you don't need like they can have like 12 cards left in their deck, and you can just like loop this and deck them out, right?
Yeah, and this came up especially for like the red Syndra deck, is because you're playing mostly cards that are just worth 3, and you're not swinging your weapon very much. You're just like trading card for card, and they might be playing 1 for 5s, so you're actually falling behind on fatigue naturally. But the kunai loop at the end of the game is kind of your way of catching back up. So you need to find a way to get them low enough. Blessing of Inzerika helps a lot with this, but you need to find a way to get them low enough through big breakpoints, chip damage, like whatever it is. And then once they're low enough, your kunai loop can take over the game. So I had a number of games where I was down like 6 cards, but it just didn't matter because I had full tempo at the end of the game.
One thing to note here is the way that your opponent can break out of this kunai loop will be with Sigil Solace or
Calming Breeze, I think it's called.
yeah, Calming Breeze. So if you can either know or if you somehow know that they do have one of these cards, do understand that this loop will fall apart if they draw one of these cards.
Yeah, I was going to mention that as well, but it's a good point. There is some counterplay built into the set, so good to be aware of. Good to track their pitch stock.
I've definitely lost games where I thought I had them in the lock, and then 2 turns into the loop, they just go Sigil Solace, and I go, oh no, I just like devoted my whole turn for this play, and then now I just they're coming, they're now they're the one that's ripping my whole hand apart. And it's one of the most depressing things that can happen in this format is someone has a Calming Breeze or a Sigil Solace.
Yeah, definitely. I think if more of your blues are cards like blue Grow Claws, that's a 1 for 3, or some kind of 0 for 2, like Fire Tenant, it does help a little bit with the situation, where as long as you're not like completely out of cards on your last 4 cards in deck, you can potentially like still rip some cards even if they do have it. Yeah, Calming Gesture, Sigil Solace is very good in these spots.
Be careful not to go too all in if you don't have to.
Yeah, we mentioned this during pre-release, but look for spots to break the chain. There's a lot of spots where you can break the chain and get an extra dagger back, or like fit in an extra dagger swing, so just be aware of it. I have one example here, but there's just so many, I don't think we can cover them all. One example is like if you have a 4 the Drakai and 2 daggers, you can go dagger, break the chain, dagger again, 4 the Drakai, return a dagger. So you can basically do like 1/1/4 off of 2 cards, and you go down a dagger, which is pretty solid.
Yeah, very reasonable.
Yeah, basically your basic play patterns in each of the decks. Blue Syndra is going dagger, 1 cost retrieve. You can add on head jabs to that. You can obviously not dagger if your hand lets you not dagger. And then for red Syndra, you're just playing lots of head jabs and converting all your cards for 3 and abusing Blessing of Inzerika to guarantee draconic starters and make it hard for your opponent to convert. You can also use fealty as starters in this deck as well.
I guess one note for this deck would be how important do you think Code of Allegiance is for this deck?
I think it's super good. It's like really, really important.
Is it gonna be like if you see it, you're gonna pick it up quite early? Like if you see it, maybe early pack two, like you kind of like pack one, pick one Code of Allegiance once you know you're in like Syndra.
I think so. Certainly the red line deck.
Okay, so once you know you're in the red line deck, then you're really looking for the Code of Allegiance at that point.
Yeah, I think it's just super strong. It also means if you brick on a starter, you can break Code of Allegiance and then swing a dagger and play all your Draconic Head jobs. It does limit you, but the limit's not really that big of a deal because you can play your non-Draconic Head jobs, break the chain, Code of Allegiance, Kunai, Draconic Head jobs.
Oh yeah, because all of your non-draconic head jabs should have natural go again.
Yeah, exactly.
Ah, that makes sense. Okay, that's actually cool to know. Yeah, I've been impressed with Code of Allegiance, and I think the Red Syndra deck really does let you like abuse this card the most, from what I've seen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the card's impressive in general and all the Draconic heroes and builds, but I think that the Red Syndra deck is where it shines the brightest, I guess.
I guess then, lastly, do you want to just talk about the matchups that Syndra has to do? Or,
Yeah.
yeah, you know what I wanted to say.
Yeah, we can talk about notes for each of the matchups. So Syndra loves going second. Surprise to basically no one. Going second's good in this format. Syndra really likes going second because she's not great at going first. If you do go first, I think we mentioned this: 3 blocks, defense reacts, Blessing of Finzerakai help you win and catch back up. And often it's very hard to leak damage going first, but if your hand is really good and can do that, it's worth doing. Note that you can just like swing a dagger and then close the chain and rebuy it. You may just let them filter, but I have had hands where if they block the dagger, you can actually like push enough damage that it is worth doing it. But just make sure you math it out really, really carefully. What you don't want to do is like I've seen people like go off Arsenal, especially early on, like go off Arsenal, break both their daggers, and you're like, okay, you took 3 damage, and it's like, well, I think this is just a good trade for me. You have no Arsenal and no daggers, like I'm just actually ahead. So be careful with it. But if you can like keep a dagger and leak some reasonable damage, and that's pretty good.
I've had a game where I've just like looked at my hand. I have 2 blues. I started with the dagger, and like they didn't block the first 2 daggers, so I was just like, oh, I'll just close the chain, rebuy my daggers, arsenal, head jab, pass, and it's just like you leak 2 damage and you get your full dagger, and you get an arsenal is like kind of kind of reasonable. Like there are spots where your opponent will like look at their hand and be like, hmm, I'm gonna be careful and not block these daggers. And just swinging the daggers and then rebuying them right away is like kind of good enough. And if you think you're not gonna you don't have enough like blues to rebuy your dagger, just like pitching a blue and attacking with the first dagger, and if they no block it, immediately breaking and just rebuying and arsenaling passing is like a reasonable line with Syndra.
And I also think playing against Syndra, blocking the dagger can often be okay, especially the second dagger. The first dagger is like sometimes a bit of a gamble, but if they go dagger dagger, then blocking the second one is like usually, I think it's like more often than not correct.
That makes sense.
Assuming that your hand has reasonable block values. If your hand doesn't block very well, maybe not.
Yeah, I've had hands where I've played Fang and I like open up my opening hand and I see two no blocks in my hand and I go, I hope this Syndra doesn't just like swing all their whole hand at me right now.
Yeah. If you have one of those hands, you don't want to. But I think if you have like a 2 block and 3 blocks, blocking certainly the second dagger is correct, and first dagger, I don't know. I haven't made up my mind about that one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess if they pitch a red to swing a dagger, you're blocking it, right?
Yeah, if they're pitching a red, definitely. If they're pitching a blue, it's trickier.
I feel like if they're spending a whole card to swing a dagger, at that point you should be blocking the first dagger.
Yeah, agreed with that. Last note for going first and second, you can activate Syndra on your opponent's turn. I don't think that this is very relevant most of the time, but if your opponent, for some reason, uses up their action point, you can filter. So,
If you have too many blues in your hand, yeah, I guess so.
or like no blue, like if they play Blessing of Inserakai pass, you can filter.
Oh yeah, I can pitch 3 reds for it. It's kind of. I guess that's the only way if they play Blessing of Inzerakai for you to be able to pitch 3 reds.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't really do this most of the time. I guess like if like Fang, I don't know. If Fang like swings you wouldn't pitch 3 reds, but if Fang swings his dagger, you block 2 cards, he doesn't react. You can potentially filter more if you want to.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I guess more of a note to just like the option is there if it ever comes up. But if your opponent does have action points and if you do try to use Syndra, they do get to attack you again. So if you just empty your hand, they do have the opportunity to just like use the rest of their hand. There is no priority in the end step in this game, so yeah, don't get caught by that.
Yeah, it's very niche. It's not a every game thing.
And what about the specific hero matchups? Do you have notes on that?
For Arachne, I think D-Reacts and Leapfrog really let you make good blocking decisions against Arachne. It helps you play around the reactions, and it's kind of the scariest part. I think that generally the way you win is that you just have better numbers than them if they are not able to leverage their on hits. So if you can just pressure consistently and not really stumble, you generally come out ahead. And Arachne can really take advantage of if you stumble or they start to get tempo and force you to block, then things kind of fall apart. But if you are able to defend well and just kind of like keep up pressure, it's pretty tough for Arachne to win.
I guess most of their attacks or attack reaction buff for 3 as well, right? So if you do have like a 3 power or a defense reaction, then you want to cover it up exactly is all you have to do.
Yeah.
They come in with like a Mark of the Black Widow for 4. If you block 4, then if they try an attack reaction over, as long as you have a defense reaction, it will snuff out that card completely. I don't think there's any attack reaction in this set that buffs for more than 3, right? At least at rare and common.
There is one. It's called. Is it called Push? No, it's not called Push the Point. That's the podcast. To the Point. It's called To the Point. To the Point is a 0 for 3, but if they're marked, it's 0 for 4 instead. And that's a rare Assassin Warrior attack reaction, but that is the only 0 for 4.
Okay.
And Fang has some second chain link for +4s, but
Fang doesn't really have on hits though, right?
yeah, Fang doesn't have on hits. Oh, and To the Point is only for daggers, notably. It doesn't work on stealth cards.
Yeah, then it doesn't matter. Does it matter? There's no Arachne dagger on hits that matter other than Kiss of Death, I guess.
Well, you can discard to like Black Widow to buff a dagger if it's the Chelicera. Wait, can you? I know you can. I'm wondering if you get the on hit.
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, you can. Black Widow will give you the on hit.
Yes, yes. If you are either Black Widow or the number 2,
Funnel web, yeah.
then yeah, if they have Graphene Trisilla on the board, then they can push the point to push it over by 1 more. But at that point, they are also pushing it 3 more with that ability. You're kind once they're in that spot, you have to be willing to lose a card.
Yeah.
You can't just like block it out and hope, right? Like it'll most likely have go again already, and yeah, you're already forked. Then do you wanna talk about the Syndra mirror?
Yeah. So for Syndra, go second, very good. Don't be afraid to use your armor on the daggers to help prevent cut through is a really nice tip. There aren't that many on hits, so doing this can be pretty relevant, especially if you know that cut throughs have gone around, although you may have just picked the cut through if you see it, so I don't know how much this comes up, but maybe you drop like an Art of Dragonfire or something, I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's gotta be hard to know that if your opponent's gonna have cut through or not, but I think it's a good assumption to think that they're gonna do something like cut through or this is gonna be like same thing for you want to be saving the equipment for poison blade as well. Like I feel like saving your equipment for on hits isn't the way to do it. It'll be just like if you have a good spot to use your equipment, you should just do so. And one thing to note would be cut through, and some Syndra hands is like night and day when cut through is turned online early or not. So some hands just falls apart if it can't, and some hands, just does some ridiculous amount of damage if cut through has go again and +1 early.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. And then be aware of danger digits just in general as a reaction can be really threatening, but also especially with Poison Blade, as the two life can be just like an unpreventable lethal that you can kind of run into. So if you know they have danger digits and they like pitch a Poison Blade, that's something worth noting, for example.
If it's gonna get to the late game, know that they're gonna have these an unpreventable 2 damage. So you can't go down to 2 against in the Syndra mirror sometimes. A lot of the times there's nothing you can really do about it. You just have to like convert your hand as well as you can. And it's gonna be a race to see who can do the most amount of damage in the Syndra mirror most of the time.
And I think just in general, like using your armor before you get that low is probably always correct, just because they could have it could be like Poison Blade and a flick effect, but it could also just be like they have two flick effects. So I don't know. If you're getting to like 4 or 5, using your equipment on a dagger is like just correct.
And like it's not like these decks like Syndra decks aren't really good at using fealty every turn. So like giving them if they already have one fealty, like giving them the second fealty doesn't really do that much. Or am I missing something there?
It depends a bit on the deck. I think the fealty is valuable, but it's not the end of the world. I think if you can block out Mark, you should. I don't think you block out the fealty for the most part, though, unless you know you want to block with that many cards anyways, and you're like, I don't want to get I don't want to risk them like Art of the Dragon powering me, and then you're just like, I can just like block it out and hope that the fealty matters for them. But like, yeah, for the most part, you're not blocking out. You block out the mark, you don't block out the fealty once you're marked. Yeah. It depends a lot on the deck. Some decks it's like just Art of Dragonfire. The more that you have stuff like generic head jobs in your deck, the better fealty gets though, because then you just get to turn them into Ronin Renegades, which is like pretty good.
That makes sense. It's not possible to know though, right? Like when you're playing against your opponent.
Yeah, it's not necessarily super easy to tell.
It feels like it's usually too late by the time you're just like that you find out that like oh they wanted to use their fealties or like oh they wanted to have like 4 fealties on board.
Yeah, I think like four fealty doesn't matter, but certainly the first one I think is decently valuable, and even the second one like kind of matters, and then after that I think it kind of goes down in value. I think they can basically always convert the fealty at least for like a resource in terms of like buying back the dagger. So I think that they're like almost always able to get one out of a fealty, and then sometimes it's more. So it's not like a must block on hit, but if you can block it, it's pretty good.
Okay, that makes sense. Then what about Fang? How does the Fang matchup look like for Syndra?
I think that your D reacts are really important in the end games to help you block. I think if they get Fang online really quickly, it can be a little bit tough. But the way that you win is just by like being aggressive and converting efficiently, and then having defense reacts in the end game to help you catch up. We talked about using Leapfrog on Chainlink 1, and then if they react, you can jump it to Chainlink 2, and sort of just like doing that every time they are representing a double react turn. It's pretty big. And something to pay attention to against Fang is what their cards that they're pitching are like. Some people's Fang decks, if they have a bunch of blues, and those blues are not attack reactions, they can potentially, or like maybe like knife through butter or something, they can run out of ways to give their attacks go again. And if they just like don't have enough go again, sometimes you can actually play kind of like blocky and then just wait and then just go, oh, you're not able to give your stuff go again, and then your like end game falls apart, and I can like kunai loop you. So I think that is like a game state to like keep an eye out on, that if the Fang deck is like well constructed won't be an issue, but if you notice your Fang opponent like not having attack reactions in their pitch stack, it's something that you could play towards.
Okay, yeah, that's actually kind of cool to know. So if they're only pitching blues, like the blue 3 block warrior actions that they typically don't give go again. I guess like the only exception there would be like incision with a fealty is the way that they can do that.
Yeah, like incision with a fealty, or like any of the attack reactions with a fealty are like the exceptions to this. Like nip at their heels is also an attack reaction for these purposes. I think Fang like wants these in their pitch stack for this reason, but if you ever notice that there's a Fang deck that like doesn't have access to these because they're like a little bit more premium, it can be pretty big edge. I've definitely I have gotten Fangs to the spot where all that they can do is like dagger or like pitch a blue, and then they're like, my dagger gets +2, dagger for 3, and I'm like, oh, okay, I have a 3 block.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds pretty bad for Fang, and honestly seems like a very possible or like a reasonable game state to get at once they're at their like second cycle or halfway through their second cycle.
Yeah, yeah. So it's worth just like making a mental note of what they're pitching. Keep in mind they can like arsenal attack reactions, and I think you kind of have to have D reacts to ever get to this point, or you probably just die before it. But D reacts do help you navigate to this point, and I think that your super late endgame is better than their super late endgame because they can like run out of gas in a way that you sort of can't, so long as you have cards to pitch to Kunai loop.
Yeah, and I guess a note would be like technically the fealties aren't they don't stay on the board forever. If they ever can't play a draconic card or if they don't make a new fealty, all the fealties do blow up at the end of the turn. Um so if you can either rip their whole hand apart one turn or they just don't have enough draconic cards in their pitch stack, their fealties will go away, so they won't even be able to swing the dagger without pitching for it. And it doesn't have go again. It's only attacking for one. It's honestly a really really bad kunai at that point. So your weapon is just far better than theirs.
Yeah, it's like weird. I think like the majority of games against Fang like never even get here, but some amount of them do, and it's good to be aware of. And when it does come up, it's really really relevant. It's interesting how like Fang feels like the hero that if you can strip a bunch of cards and like get them down to really low on cards in deck is the one that can just like potentially completely fall apart the most. It really does depend on the blues that they're playing, but yeah, some Fang decks just kind of like actually just fall apart and don't do anything. Whereas like Syndra always has the kunais, and then Arachne, so long as they didn't break and flick all their daggers, has like double dagger, which is pretty strong. Whereas like Fangs is just like kind of needs cards and reactions, and once he runs out, it's just like he's out.
I've definitely had Arachne games where I don't have any daggers by the end of the game, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do against this Cindra that has recurring daggers.
Yeah, if you run out of daggers as Arachne, you also have a pretty bad end game. And if you can't keep cards as Syndra, you also have a bad end game. So I think that they can like all have bad end games.
The most awkward moment is when a Syndra player just looks at you, rebuys their kunais, and passes without attacking you. You look at your 4 card hand without any weapons, and you're just like, my best line here is attacking for 3 with this naked stealth card. They block for 3, and then they swing your kunais, and then they lock you out that way. That's definitely happened to me once, and very sad moment.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very good.
No, I have learned my lesson that destroying all my weapons is most likely not a good idea.
Yeah, I think I've been too afraid to let that happen, but I've been on the opposite side where I've seen my opponents do that.
Yeah, it's like it typically goes like, oh, I think I can kill them. You break the mark of the huntsman, and then they play Sigil of Solace, and you're just like, oh, I'm 1 point short now. Now I don't have daggers to swing for the rest of the game.
Yeah, not good, not good.
It's like you thought you win the game. You don't win the game. They have a rare.
Definitely seen that come up. Ugh, painful.
Very painful, very painful. I've gotten sheltered and like the instant discard shelter after trying to flick my last dagger with danger digits. Oh, that's the most it hurt my soul. That hurt my soul.
Yeah, I got calming breezed on a flick with danger digits, and it was also really bad for me. I think calming breeze is like not an anti Syndra card; it's an anti Arachne card. That's sort of my take.
Yes. Yeah, most definitely. I think so. But it is still good against Syndra, I think.
Yeah, it's still fine, but it's better against Arachne. All right, I think that's going to be a wrap. Bit of a longer episode, and I sort of suspect this may be a little bit of a trend for this set. I think there's just a lot going on. The heroes are pretty deep. There's a bunch of ways to draft them and a lot to kind of dive into. But hopefully this will help you out for your RTNs. Best of luck. Let us know how it goes, and if there's other cards that you think that are good that we don't know about, or other Syndra archetypes that we didn't discuss, we'd love to hear about them. You can get in touch with us through the Patreon Discord or on social media. Jay is at UadaJ, and I'm at Yukili Bender over on Twitter or X, and I'm also on Blue Sky as well with the same handle. If you want to email us, you can email us at onthebobble@gmail.com and send us your messages there. And yeah, that's going to be a wrap. Best of luck, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Bye for now.